Debaters at IQ² last week took the topic governments should not censor the internet. And we joined the evening with the head of public policy for Google in Asia, Ross Lejeunesse. He's arguing in favour of the proposition and against censorship.
Freedom of expression is a wonderful thing. My colleagues and I will argue that governments should not censor the internet. I'll discuss what makes the internet so unique as a communications medium, the power and promise that the internet holds because of its open, distributed nature, and the view that Google takes in this debate. My colleague David Marr will discuss the particular debate occurring here in Australia, and my colleague Anthony Lowenstein will give us a sense of how this debate fits into global trends and issues around censorship of the internet. Today, 4 in 5 Australians have an internet service at home. The number of internet users around the world is almost 2 billion, and there are over 1 trillion web pages on the internet. The numbers are impressive and growing all the time. Now, the internet is not only vast, but it's dynamic. In fact, by the time I finish speaking, the internet will already look much different than it does right now, because in 9 minutes, 216 additional hours of video will be uploaded to YouTube. The world will write 500,000 new tweets, and 2.5 million words will be added to Blogger. Think of a child today. Now, within seconds, she has up-to-the-minute news reports from Australia. She can access the most current research and information on everything from this evening's budget speech to news archives of the Sydney Morning Herald, dating back to the 1800s. She can read essays and articles from Australia's thought and opinion leaders, some of whom are on this stage tonight. She can use Street View to drive through the streets of Sydney and see the city. And she can go to the websites of museums and actually see their collections. She can email Mr. Rudd directly and ask him why his government thinks an ISP filter is a good idea. And maybe she would hear back. She can access all of this information because the internet is open. There is no curator, no librarian, no gatekeeper, no one controlling who gets in and what they see, and that's the way it should be. Now, with these fundamental characteristics, the internet has evolved into a globe-spanning platform of communications, ideas, business, information sharing, used by 1 in 4 people around the world and growing faster than any other form of communication ever has. And we would not have had this growth if governments had looked to control the internet at its inception. So not everyone is quite so positive about the liberating power of the internet or believes in such open access to information. Many governments find this openness and this easy access to information very threatening. What makes the internet so extremely powerful is exactly what makes it so dangerous in the eyes of some governments, especially those governments who have grown accustomed to controlling other forms of media and which now want to control the internet as well. So the battle is truly on. And if we're not careful, and if we don't push back against this worrying trend, we may end up with an internet which is much different than the one we currently enjoy today. We may end up with an internet that is a series of national walled gardens, where each is controlled by that nation's government with different rules, and in which each government decides which types of trees and plants get to live in that garden and which don't, where each plant is even carefully selected, placed, and then pruned as necessary by that government/gardener, and where that government/gardener has the right and ability to keep the weeds out. I don't think that the majority of Australians believe that this is an internet that they want for their country or for the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Ross. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I guess the plan was to get the irksome American accents out of the way as quickly as possible. Some of you may be assuming that because I live in China, I intend to be up here defending China's policies of internet censorship. I want to disabuse you of that notion immediately. I absolutely do not intend to defend China's policies of internet censorship. I am opposed to political internet censorship, particularly the way that it's practiced in China. I find it intrinsically objectionable, and I sincerely hope that one day we may live in a world that is free of political internet censorship. My instinct is to oppose curbs on those precious freedoms that we enjoy in societies, especially with long traditions of political freedom, freedom of expression, societies like Australia. Now, I am not familiar enough with CleanFeed, with the Rudd government's proposed mandatory internet filtering, to really take a stand on this, but I'm inclined to believe that, knowing myself well, that if the debate were actually in fact about the proposals now on the books, I might find myself sitting on this side. But that is not what this debate is about. This debate is, the proposal here is that governments should not censor the internet, not the Rudd government's proposed internet filtering law should not be passed. And for this debate, then, I am compelled to argue that not all governments ought to restrain or to refrain from internet censorship, not certainly in all instances. This is something I believe most reasonable people will accept. China isn't the only country where the value of free speech online, even political speech, must be sometimes subordinated to realities. India's internet censorship is a much less well-known case than China's, and certainly far less onerous, but as a democracy with an essentially free press, India is an example that probably makes the case for the necessity of internet censorship more clear. Google famously pulled its internet search business out of China, in part because it could no longer stomach China's increasingly stringent censorship demands, but Google routinely bows to pressure from New Delhi when it comes to India.
Imagine the scene a year from now in the House of Representatives. It's question time. Kevin Rudd is the Prime Minister, because he will still be the Prime Minister. And let us suppose for a moment that Tony Abbott is still the Leader of the Opposition. And Tony Abbott unrolls a hideous screenshot of carnal action. Right? The internet filter is all bedded down, it's all in place, all's there, the scheme is operating. And Tony Abbott comes into the House of Representatives, rolled up, and then unrolls with a flourish a screenshot of a hideous sexual act going on, and says to the Prime Minister, "How can you allow this on the internet? You have the power to stop it, the machinery is there, why aren't you stopping it? How can you expose the community and children to this?" And he can come into the House day after day, week after week, with trashy screenshots taken from some of the most hideous areas of the internet, which are, in fact, lawfully screened, and he can say, how is your government allowing this? Because the minute you have the power to filter the internet, you are responsible for everything that is there. And you wonder, why would a government do this? Well, first, it's important to understand it's being done because Rudd wants it done. There are no freelancers in his cabinet. Stephen Conroy is doing what the Prime Minister wants him to do. Kevin Rudd has cleared the decks for the election. He has cleared the decks of any attempt to deal with global warming. He has abandoned casually plans for a Charter of Rights, but he is ploughing on with the filter.
Put to the audience vote, the motion against censorship was carried by a whopping 70%. Well, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the show. I'll see you next Tuesday at 11 a.m. right here on ABC One for the next big serving of big ideas. Or if you're looking for a fun cerebral workout in the meantime, you can head to our website at abc.net.au/bigideas.
I will argue that governments should not censor the internet. I'll discuss what makes the internet so unique as a communications medium, the power and promise that the internet holds because of its open, distributed nature, and the view that Google takes in this debate. But it's dynamic. In fact, by the time I finish speaking, the internet will already look much different than it does right now, because in 9 minutes, 216 additional hours of video will be uploaded to YouTube. The world will have an internet service at home. The number of internet users around the world is almost 2 billion, and there are over 1 trillion web pages on the internet. The numbers are impressive and growing all the time. Now, the internet is not only vast. My colleague David Marr will discuss the particular debate occurring here in Australia, and my colleague Anthony Lowenstein will give us a sense of how this debate fits into global trends and issues around censorship of the internet. Today, 4 in 5 Australians.
Debaters at IQ² last week took the topic governments should not censor the internet. And we joined the evening with the head of public policy for Google in Asia, Ross Lejeunesse. He's arguing in favour of the proposition and against censorship.
Freedom of expression is a wonderful thing. My colleagues and